So a little bit about our organisations. So for people who don't know us, Sear Data is a technology company working in the for-purpose space. We work with hundreds of place-based organisations, not-for-profits, philanthropic funders and government funders to use data to demonstrate impact. And we've been doing this work for more than 8 years. We've been working with Cowboys House now for almost 2 years, and thrilled that we get to tell the story of transformation through data activation and social impact at Cowboys Community Foundation. As mentioned earlier, the foundation was established in 2015 by the North Queensland Cowboys, drawing over 20 years of leadership in community and corporate social impact and social responsibility. NRL Cowboys House is a culturally safe boarding facility for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women attending partner schools in Townsville. And Torch Advisory brings together best-in-class skills and experience working across so many areas of focus, but with particular deep experience in sport. And we're partnered with James at a number of different projects. So what we're going to talk about today is the Community Foundation's journey and the power of sport and clubs to deliver genuine, meaningful social change in the areas in their communities. I think we all understand that sport brings people together, but the Cowboys and the work that Fiona's been doing over many years has demonstrated what the clubs and codes can do to transform people's lives in communities. So we're going to deep dive into that. And then we're going to talk about why measuring impact matters and how it's important to go on a data-informed journey to improve outcomes and reporting, but also to make better decisions to then deliver more improved services for the people that are benefiting from the work. Then James is going to talk a little bit about how sport organisations can build a practical framework for measurement. And we're going to have a sneak peek into the Cowboys Impact Measurement Framework and some Q&A. So please do drop into the chat any of your questions. We'll be having a fairly interactive conversation today. So Fiona, to get us started, could you please share with us the journey, the club journey and the strategy, where it started and where it is now?
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining and thank you for your interest. I'm joining from Wulgurukaba country up here in Townsville, and also acknowledge my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are on our call today. Thank you, and thanks Christy and Sear Data. So my journey began, I guess, a long time ago with the Cowboys, 17 years ago. And I was employed to write their first community strategy when their club changed ownership from being owned by News Corp to being a community-owned club. So fair to say I was probably initially employed because I had to be employed, probably not because they really understood at that point in time, you know, what could be. So I feel like I was sort of handed the best job in the world, you know, to be able to start something and work with an incredible organisation to build what we've been able to build, not just for the club or for sport, but also for our community, and really cement our, you know, our reason for being. And yeah, it's been a massive privilege. So I guess that was the start of my journey. I was sort of handed a remit. I was able to create a plan and work with the community on better understanding what our community needed and how we fitted into that fabric, or how we could fit into that fabric, how the community wanted us to do that. Yeah, I remember presenting our first 5-year once I'd created this strategy, presenting it to our board at the time, who probably didn't really understand, what I was talking about, quite frankly. I did actually go away and rewrite that into language that was probably a little bit more related to our sporting business. I didn't come from a sporting background, so it was a whole new journey for me as well. When I started, I guess I wasn't handed a budget either, so that was a bit of a, hey, you can do that, that's awesome, but you need to figure out how you're going to pay for it. So I think we've probably all been in that position, and it's a little bit daunting when you start. How do you start with nothing? At that point in time, our club was, as I said, it had just gone through a transition to a community-owned model. So it wasn't, we had this amazing big brand, but, our budgets certainly weren't anywhere near that. We weren't actually winning games either, so we weren't particularly well liked either at that point in time. So it was a bit of a tough gig from the start. I guess my first part of my journey was really getting to know our community, where we could potentially add value, where our needs were in our footprint. And there was a lot of need in the north. A very high First Nations population up here. We have a lot of really, really remote communities who don't have parity in access to a lot of services that our mainstream cities do. At the time, we obviously had some pretty high-profile First Nations players as well, so that was really helpful, who were quite keen to support First Nations people in our footprint and bring a bit more recognition onto the national stage about the needs. So I guess that was probably the start of the journey. I remember my first, the first government grant I got was the most exciting grant ever. It was, I think it was a $4,000 grant from Sport and Recreation, and it was to bring a carnival onto Palm Island, and it was around the time where Palm Island were going through a particularly tough time with the riots and some pretty awful headlines and sensationalised things. So it was really a community that were under a lot of pressure and struggling a lot. So it was a really great opportunity to be able to take that first grant and create something positive out of that. So yeah, I guess that's the very beginning. Fast forward to now, we're a foundation who we employ around 86 people now. So I think it's fair to say our foundation probably employs more people than our football department do at the moment. So it's pretty interesting transition. And we are getting to do and see amazing things every single day in everything that we do. So it's just been such a privilege and such a journey.
Thanks, Fiona. Do you want to tell us about the main work that the NRL Cowboys House does and why it was established in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So many of the programs we started earlier in the foundations, well, actually before we even had set up the foundation, probably more in our football club community programs, were working with First Nations young people in high schools, probably year 11 and 12, transitioning into employment. And that was based off a grant that we'd received through the government back then. We were able to achieve some pretty amazing outcomes in that program, and through that we worked in partnership with government on the opportunity for NRL Cowboys House. So what the gap was in our community was that a majority of our really remote communities only have primary schools, not secondary schools, and the ones that do have a secondary school, it's more a high school program that they call a bypass secondary education. And their statistics and data show that there are so many young people in regional and remote communities, First Nations young people, that did not have access to secondary school education. So the only opportunity for those young people was to board, to leave community, go away and board. And their success profile in traditional boarding models was very, very low. And for a number of reasons, but also a lot of young people in the remote communities don't actually have the educational outcomes from primary school to even qualify to go to a mainstream boarding school. And on top of that, the costs were quite prohibitive. Like, we have a lot of families in our remote communities that are social dependents, and that is really prohibitive for young people. So a lot of First Nations kids in regional and remote communities were actually they weren't accessing secondary school education. So it just wasn't an option for them. So NRL Cowboys House was a model that is a little bit different from a traditional boarding model. It is a boarding house. We have 100 young people plus living with us now, from year 7 through to year 12. We partner with 13 different schools, so it's not typical traditional boarding. It's one boarding, same school. This is really a culturally safe environment for young people with a whole wraparound service that they need to survive and thrive in mainstream schooling. So that's Cowboys House. That's I guess the problem we're solving is really removing geographic disadvantage and providing parity in access to education for young people that don't have the same opportunities as we do.
So the Cowboys House is one of the main focuses of the Community Foundation, but you have a number of other programs and initiatives as well. Do you want to just talk a bit about that, and then we'll get into the impact journey?
Yeah, sure. I guess from our Cowboys House, last year we opened a graduate campus. So what we find, we expanded our remit there to once our young people, were successfully getting through year 12 and achieving all the goals that they needed, housing was still a problem. Economic participation, going back to their communities, was still a problem. We figured they really needed to stay, be away from home for a little bit longer to get the qualifications and the skills and everything that they needed to be able to turn that education into, economic participation for themselves and really change the landscape of the opportunities that were available to them. So that's a very new one that we've done. We also have a school attendance program. That's our Try for 5 program. It operates across all of North Queensland and is really around increasing school attendance and participation for young people, working with families and communities on increasing that. A big problem we were finding also in Cowboys House is that a lot of our young people, they come 3 to 5 years behind their academic peers. So that's a massive steep curve for our young people from remote communities. Move away from home, leave everything that go into a new school environment and figure out pretty quickly that you are really, a long way behind your peers. So it's trying to now expand our Try for 5 program into all the communities that are feeder communities for NRL Cowboys House, but not just for NRL Cowboys House. It's really increasing, trying to increase the levels of engagement in schools, and so they also have the choice. So if they don't want to go to Cowboys House, they can go to Grammar. If that's on offer and their academic ability is there, then that should be a choice as well. So we sort of figured out pretty quickly we need to actually start working at the beginning of the story, not joining in the middle and then trying to contribute to the end. So we run a number of other programs as well, but that's probably our largest contribution, I think.
Thank you. So do you want to talk a little bit about the impact journey? So data and impact measurement, why it matters to the club, what's important about how you're doing it, the journey, and then as with that, the business case for social impact. So why is it important to the club as well?
Yeah, look, it's super important in so many ways. I guess we were so busy doing, and the cost to, there's a cost to doing it, right? There's a financial cost to doing it. We were really, really blessed, I guess, to have Hand, Heart, Pocket and John Villiers Trust, so 2 of our philanthropic partners, come on board, see what we were doing, see the impact, but then say, okay, so how are you telling these stories? How are you using those stories to advocate to government, to to open their eyes to where they should be investing money, and how are you using your data to continually improve what you're doing, and how are you using your data to be able to replicate what you're doing? So if the model is working, how can you lift and shift it to someone else or somewhere else so they can have all the information to be able to replicate really easily? So I guess that they were great. They really challenged us a lot on on asking those hard questions. And it was a frustration for us, and we actually really didn't know where to start. We were sort of measuring bits and pieces along the way based on funding that we had that we needed to do. And, so I guess we intrinsically knew what we needed to do and what the problems were, but we weren't articulating them well, and we didn't have the infrastructure in place to be able to tell those stories from an evidence base. So I guess our journey has been, we were doing it bits and pieces. We intrinsically knew what we were, and we were continually growing and improving, but we were not telling that story, and we weren't amplifying the impact as well as we could to actually put in front of government and say, there's a narrative here, and here is the evidence, and you need to work with us and others to change that. You still have a problem. So yeah, our Hand, Heart, Pocket, John Villiers Trust were amazing in supporting us and joining us with you and allowing us to invest in resource and holding our hand through this whole journey. And whilst we knew it was a big undertaking, it was actually an even bigger undertaking for us. But yeah, we've been loving the journey and learning so much, and really, I guess, educating our whole team on why it's important too. So whilst we understood why it was important, a big learning for us in this whole journey was actually, educating our whole team on why it's important, and around the quality of data in is the quality we get out the other end. So and they have to be part of that because they're the ones that are actually doing the doing.
Yeah. So we're going to show a sneak peek in a minute of some of the work that we've been doing together, and I'll talk as well about the journey that we've been on in a moment. Could you just dive into why is the Cowboys brand such an incredible lever for creating community change, and how does it then, the work that the foundation and the NRL House, Cowboys House does, how does that drive more value into the club as a business?
Look, sport is like this. It's just such an incredible connector. It's an incredible influencer. We are able to reach the audiences that other brands struggle to reach and engage with. So it really doesn't mean that we're doing anything particularly different to many other brilliant organisations out there that are doing incredibly great things. It's just that we have this incredible way of influencing, and it's such a privilege to be able to do that, and it's a big responsibility. I remember, I always tell this story, but it's a story of many of the sports people on this call will understand. But I went into a bakery one day just here in Townsville, and I was just waiting in the line, and I was looking, there was a guy who was obviously a rough sleeper that was in there, and there was another guy who had just come out of the courthouse, in his three-piece suit and everything. And in the corner, they had the TV going, and they had a rerun of one of our games and a particularly controversial decision that had been made. The community was in outrage, and it was just hilarious. I watched these two people who would be completely intimidated by each other in any normal circumstance, and they were both watching this replay, and were started this conversation with each other, and were just shared in absolute indignation of what had happened, and were having this really heated, in agreement conversation. And you know, I sort of sat back and I looked at it and I thought, God, you know, neither of you would have ever had that conversation without sport. Neither of you would have ever connected or on any level, but you just have. And neither of you saw the things that intimidate each other about each other. You know, you didn't see the suit and you didn't see that he wasn't wearing shoes. It was just, I guess that example is an example of just how powerful these brands are and sport can be and is in our communities.
Yeah, totally. Just had a question from Bart. So I'll ask this question of you now, Fiona. What were some of the barriers you faced rolling out the community strategy when engaging with Indigenous communities?
Look, we didn't have many barriers with the communities themselves. I guess, you know, we really worked hard on identifying in the communities. By the time we did NRL Cowboys House, we had really strong relationships in place with communities, and I guess that was the key driver. The sporting brand opened the door. It just opens the door, and I guess the next step we did was really listened to what people wanted. And with Cowboys House, I guess, you know, our first year was the hardest year. I still have scars. It was tough. You know, when I wrote the plan for Cowboys House, I thought it was the best plan ever. So did government. I ripped it up after about 3 weeks, ripped it up, went through 2 GMs of the house within 4 months and figured out that we got it totally wrong. And, you know, the community told us that. So I guess it's, I didn't have barriers there. That wasn't our barriers. It probably internally was a bit more of a challenge, you know. Hey, you know, Cowboys, I've got this great idea. Let's look after 100 kids that don't belong to us, you know, and let's bring them into, you know, let's build this building and let's invest in that. You know, I guess the risk profile for the Cowboys, I was just very, very lucky that I still pinch myself and think, my God, like, if I were on that board, would I have thought that was a great idea back then? I don't know. So I guess barriers were probably more those internal ones first to get that trust. And then I think our brand already had the trust in our footprint from what we'd already done. Does that answer that question?
Makes a lot of sense. And what you're really highlighting is the importance of listening to community, what community want in your place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is relevant for all clubs and all codes, right? You know, what works for North Queensland is not necessarily what's going to work in other places around Australia. So, I mean, because you mentioned earlier through our conversations that you have a number of clubs coming to visit and looking at what you're doing as the importance of community and social impact continues to grow significantly for sport and clubs. So when people are coming to visit, what is your advice? What are you sort of sharing with other codes around the establishment and the work that you do?
Well, we like a lot of our clubs in our code are doing amazing things in their own communities, and you know, some are at the beginning, you know, earlier in their journey than we are. Some are in the same, you know, where we are, as, you know, similar place. And I guess we're pretty lucky that we all collaborate quite well together, and this is a space where we don't compete, right? It's a space where we can help each other and we can work with each other and we can, you know, really empower our sport to do some pretty awesome things in our own backyards. So I guess my advice is, you know, really understand your own community. What works in our community, as you said, it might not be relevant for a different community. It might not be important to your community. Figure out where your community wants you to work with them on, and, you know, and start there. And I know, you know, I look at different clubs in our world, you know, like Titans do an amazing thing in the disability space, like such an amazing program, so impactful, and it's just brings so much value, you know. And we don't do that. You know, I go to them and say, how are you doing this? Like, you know, it's I would love to learn more and see if there's anything more we can do that we're not doing as well. So yeah, I guess it's really make it your own and work with your own community and, use your beautiful brands and influence to be able to do some do some wonderful things.
Thanks, Fiona. I might just encourage everyone to drop questions in. I'm going to show you a slide now just to articulate the journey that we've been on together, as Fiona mentioned. So we started understanding what you were collecting in terms of data and stories already in the house. You mentioned that you had to collect a number of different elements, Fiona, for reporting. But then we were looking at, well, where is all of this sitting? What outcomes are you aligning to? And then how does all of this come together? Through that, we made some recommendations for the implementation, of which included hiring someone in your team to then support the transformation from your vision of we want to be understand our impact and be able to report on that with all of the different data elements coming together in one place and sharing our outcomes in a live dynamic way. So you hired someone to help implement, and that person has been on board now for, I think now for quite, 9 months or so. Is that right? Something like that. And then it's really about collecting all the relevant data, ensuring the quality is there, standardizing, bringing all of that together, aligning to your outcomes indicators, and then working through how to tell that story. And we are in a place now where we're, I suppose, building that up. And along the journey, you've learned quite a lot, especially around, I think, what's important to collect and understand baseline. Did you want to share anything about some examples of some of those learnings along the way?
Yeah, sure. So we've had lots and lots of learnings, and I guess that we've also, I guess it's forced us to look into lots of things, the way we collect data, where we store data, how we store data, how inconsistent that is, because what evolves is that if you don't have a framework in place, is that everyone has their own way of collecting data. So say at Cowboys House, we have teachers who collect data in one way. We have wellbeing people who collect data in a different way. We have facilities who look after the facilities who collect data in a different way too. So we all, slot into what's comfortable for us, which is, I guess, that start of our journey with you guys at SEER was to do that audit process. And that was pretty eye-opening for us at how many ways people can collect data and where we store data, and even to the points of, how safe is the way we are storing data or sharing data, right? We've got information around young people. That's, privacy is a big thing. So that was a big, a really important part of the start of our journey. That sort of probably made us realise, like, holy, we've got a fairly big journey ahead of us to get all that organised and everyone on the same hymn sheet on the way we're going to help, on the way we agree to do this. It also opened our eyes to different things like the reliability of baseline data that we were getting. So an example of that is our young people come from 32 different communities. A decision that we make in partnership with family and the community schools that the young people come from is, what is the best school fit for you in this shiny new world over here? What's important to your young person? And there's so many factors in that, but a big part of that factor is where they sit academically, as to what school is going to be able to best support that young person in Townsville. And what we found on this journey is that the data we were receiving, report cards, which are a traditional, that supposedly tells us the most information that we need. We found that we just had so much variability in, we could have a young person come in and they could have, example, one of the kids that came to us, he had, B's, he had great grades on his report, and we thought, oh, look, this kid's really sporty. He'll really be able to compete at Ignatius Park, one of our schools here that, probably has a pretty high academic rating. And we thought, oh, he will fit in, but, he'll do really well. And once he came to Cowboys House, his name was Ty and he couldn't spell it. So that is the variability that we were experiencing from the information that we were getting from the schools, which is terrible. So he probably got, from his community, his report card had Bs. That might have been because he did show up to school 80% of the time, not necessarily based on academic output, but we were making a lot of assumptions around the grades that we were making decisions on for these young people. So the impact of that is not great, right? We put him into a school that he was never going to compete in. So we were behind the eight ball. We set him up to fail unintentionally. So through this process, we found a way to now be able to establish our own baseline data through our own testing internally. So it doesn't really matter what the school report card says over here. We take that into consideration, but this gives us the data and the information we need to make a more informed choice to set that young person up to succeed. And then what this testing also does is gives us that baseline so we can ensure that we're doing the job that we're doing for each young person, and that they are continually improving. And it also gives us some really great information that is, evidence-based to the school that they're going to on how they need to best support this young person in that school environment. So, yeah, that's probably an example of, you do go down a rabbit hole that might be considered a rabbit hole, but it's been a really important rabbit hole for us.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, because what you're really saying is you're understanding how you can improve the data collection and system to understand how to support your students to thrive, as you said, and then deliver better outcomes and more impact for the individuals that are there with you. But also then you start, as you mentioned earlier, you talked about moving into the early years, and then also the transitions into into jobs, essentially. We're just showing you up here like a sneak peek. This is the sneak peek of the work that Max in the data team has been doing with our team on pulling together all the relevant data across the impact domains, we call them. What we're seeing here is just the different elements of bringing all of it together to deep dive into different components of the story, in a way that is relatively simple, because you'll be sharing this with different stakeholders. Fiona, do you intend to share it with the community and families as well?
Yeah, so this one is probably this is very high level, this dashboard. So I guess we're starting at high level, telling a story in graphs initially, but certainly from there, we're deep diving into all the actual elements that, tell a much deeper story, and not only inform us, that's sort of something we can share with families, communities, government,
And of course, reporting, I think it simplifies reporting requirements as well, doesn't it? Because you have all the information available.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing we use these for now too is also different departments, right? So if you use this for internal support, so our transitions department at Cowboys House, they now have a very visual, immediate recall of the KPIs, their high level KPIs, how many learner license, every young person from 16 who can have a learner license should have a learner license. So that absolutely helps them track their internal KPIs as well. And then that can be external data as well. So it's been revolutionary. It's great.
Thanks, Angus. I just before I hand over to James, Fiona, there's a great question from Amy, who would love to know, what was it in your first plan that you had to rip up? What was wrong about it?
With Cowboys House, what was one of the significant things I had to rip up was we identified, obviously, that, you know, we had done all of these things in our programs and everything before, but we'd never had young people live with us. So I guess, went out and advertised for our first lot of staff. We really focused on people with, I guess, experience in accommodation for youth. Now, what we found, unfortunately, is in Townsville, the only people that had experience in youth accommodation were people in juvenile justice or child safety system. So we employed all the wrong people as part of that. You know, we did that because, you know, we were looking for an experience base that we felt that we didn't have, which we didn't have. And no one grows up. It's not a profession, right? It's probably, you know, boarding. No one grows up saying, when I grow up, I'm going to be a boarding supervisor. So there was no professional acumen or training or a workforce out there. So it was certainly, that was one that we really ripped up. We ended up bringing the training in-house. We ended up searching out for people that genuinely dig kids, that genuinely were passionate about young people. And then we got experts in and put all the training around them. So we grew our own workforce, which was, you know, that added another probably 18 months to our lives to get that right. I think we've got most things pretty right now, but it's been a really big journey, and that was a key one that I ripped up.
Fiona, before I hand to James, real quick, the NRL now it requires the clubs to contribute social dollars as a reporting requirement. So what does it mean to be, like, for you guys, having done all of this work, what does that mean for you in terms of reporting to the National Rugby League?
Look, in fairness, they don't do, because of the diversity in what happens in clubland and all of the different things people do. It's probably the main program that they look at doing that is general requests. So where the community, we have a lot of requests from community just coming in. It's a separate program where we support many different community organisations and individuals on, you know, signed merchandise, things that they can generate revenue for their own, you know, for their own initiatives. Yeah, so that's it's something we're actually using this methodology with now, so it becomes much easier, which is getting the feedback from community on what that item actually generated from a dollar value in community. So it's something that I think, our game can continue to get better with. But yeah, we sort of are left up to ourselves to do that a little bit.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so James, would you mind talking to us a little bit about the frameworks and the work that you're seeing sporting organisations or codes are implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Christy, and thanks, Fiona, for it's going to be a hard presentation to follow with all that actual sort of on-the-ground experience and great outcomes you've been achieving. What I'm hoping to walk through is just a bit of a bird's eye view of what are the things you can start thinking about if you sort of aware of impact and you want to focus on that as an organisation, but you're not really sure where to start, or maybe you're a bit along the journey, but we're keen to sort of sense check where you're at against some of the different ways in which you can think about impact measurement as an organisation. So as a bit of a quick intro, I'm James, manager at Torch Advisory. My day-to-day is looking at the value of sport, active recreation and community programs more broadly. So as part of that, something I often grapple with is how sport is perceived relative to other sectors. And traditionally, we've had a lot of time, as I'm sure you all would appreciate, really being able to justify to decision makers when they're looking at a sporting program or a sporting facility relative to a school or a hospital. It's a bit of an unfair fight in a lot of cases. Those sort of hard assets and well-established sectors often have a really rich data landscape and really well-established measurement methodologies around how do we actually put numbers to the benefit and the value that those contribute to society. We all collectively, I'm sure, understand the immense value that sport brings from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, from a community perspective. However, it can be really hard to actually put that in quantitative terms and to tell that impact story to funders, to decision makers, to your communities. So that's where we get a lot of joy in terms of working through that process and hope to bring some ideas to you today. So next slide, please. Something we like to use when thinking or responding to that challenge of how do we actually sort of start thinking about measurement as an organisation. We like to think through how we can better understand impact, how we can better measure it as an organisation, and then how you can actually communicate that value. And it's all going to be quite variable depending on who you are, what your organisation's goals is, and also who your stakeholders or audiences are. So not everyone's going to have the same needs in terms of what they actually need to report on or measure in terms of impact. So we like to use what we call an impact maturity model, which is a fancy term, but is basically just doing a bit of a sense check against what are the different fields or the different domains we can sort of embed impact into our organisation and what we do, and how can we sort of think about how we're tracking against those different areas. So maybe a good way to start off is thinking about impact maturity. So that's simply what's the current state, what are our current processes, capabilities and capacity across the organisation, and then impact ambition. So what's our ideal state like in the future? What's our vision in terms of what we'd love to be able to measure, what we'd love to be able to report on and communicate as an organisation with respect to your impact? When we're thinking about impact maturity, we break it down into 7 different areas. The first one, strategy and governance, is really focusing on how you make sure that your impact is aligned with your actual governance structures and your strategic vision as an organisation. There's no point measuring, or it's really important that impact aligns with what your sort of ethos is as an organisation. Those are sort of really connected with one another. So important to consider that up front. Data collection and management is the next focus area we have there, which is obviously very key to the SEER platform and the examples that Fiona ran through earlier, but always really important to gather consistent, high quality data in so much as possible to be able to then report on impact in a robust way. And we'll talk through a couple of tools that can assist with that process. Capacity and capability. So this is all about what actual skills, resources and structures do you have within your organisation to support impact measurement. We appreciate that it's not going to be sort of something that you can put massive resources behind in all organisations. It might be that one person is doing it off the side of the desk, or in an ideal situation, maybe you have a couple of people who are sort of supporting impact measurement, or might be part of a broader remit or a broader role within a sporting organisation. So it's really important that you think about what you actually want to do and make sure that's aligned with your capacity and capability. So you're not going to be able to do a massive amount with half an FTE, but so you need to really think about what are your operational realities and what's actually achievable. Use of evidence is the next area we have there. So that's all about thinking on, great, we're going to go off and do a bunch of impact measurement and thinking, but what do we actually do with that thinking? There's not much value if you go off and do a bunch of work, collect really good data, do really good measurement, and then it just sort of sits there in a report on a shelf, just catching dust. Really valuable to think through, how do we actually use this to communicate back to stakeholders, to potential funders, to community? How do we use it to actually inform how we make decisions as an organisation so that we are maximising the impact and the value that we can have? And how do we also use that to justify funding decisions or future direction? The next area, design. So that's all about embedding impact thinking into your day-to-day, into your programs, into your services, into your initiatives. It's really valuable, I think, to have it impact almost as a bit of a North Star in terms of how you design your programs. So they're all moving in the same direction towards the same goal. So we really like an impact logic or a program logic based approach to that. Measurement is the next focus area. So that's really obviously in terms of how you measure impact and can be done in a whole variety of ways. And continuous improvement is all about bringing that together, continuously reflecting and making sure you've got the structures in place so that you're coming back and thinking about impact in a structured way on a regular basis to make the most of it. Next slide, please. So appreciate that was a bit of a really rush run through a lot of different things, and it's a bit abstract. So I'd like to put that in a couple more sort of practical terms around what that might look like for an organisation who's just setting out on their impact maturity journey. So step one, plan. Think about, we really suggest doing a bit of stock takes, sitting back, reflecting, trying to understand where you're at, where you want to be, and how exactly you want to get there, or what you need to do, what actual steps you need to get there. An example of this might be that you have a whole bunch of different programs. You run some sport participation programs, you run some community programs, you run some local events and festivals and connections with those programs, and they produce a lot of really good impacts, but you don't really have a clear narrative or a clear logic underpinning how those activities or events translate into actual outcomes for the community. We find it really useful to sort of map that out through sort of really intentionally designing what we call an impact logic, or you could also call it a theory of change or program logic, thinking through how your resources and activities actually translate to real public on the ground impact. That then also serves as a bit of a basis for number 3 there, so measurement. Once you've got your impact logic, you can go and set up an impact measurement framework, or just more generally think through what are the things we actually want to measure against and report against to hold ourselves accountable, but also to sort of report back to stakeholders and community and funders around the impact that we're achieving. We really advocate for sort of mixed methods approaches, so really important to have the quantitative lens, but it's also really important to bring that qualitative lens as well. So what's the story that brings all of the numbers together and the impact together? Some organizations might even strive to do sort of more monetized approaches, so social return on investment analysis, which is probably the next step up in terms of level of impact maturity, but it's definitely not the first thing you need to do. You can keep it simple to start with and start off with sort of output or outcome indicators. For data, so that's all about enabling the actual measurement, making sure you've got all your data systems and processes in place to meet your measurement ambitions, and then ultimately 5, use those outputs to inform decisions, improve your practice, and to tell your story of impact. And then ideally, all gone well, you can go back and start again with a fresh impact strategy and rethink, now that you've sort of met your initial ambitions, let's sort of make sure that's operationalized and you can keep on moving and keep on improving over time. And maybe the thing I'll sort of I won't go through this in detail given the time constraints, but I really like this visual as a way of showing the conceptual connection between impact logic and measurement. So you'll see there at the start, we've got a bit of a chain of inputs, activities through to outcomes and impacts. So really useful to conceptually think through what is the actual causal logic behind what we do as an organization. And then that directly sort of feeds through into the practicalities of measurement and reporting. So what are the specific measures that connect with that? What sort of baseline data do we have and targets can we set against that? And ultimately as well, how do we actually operationalize that or integrate that into our day-to-day practice, so it's not something that is a massive burden to someone, or is it sort of left off and forgotten? And that's where we really get excited about the SEER opportunity in particular, because we find historically when we do this work, it is hard to sort of keep it up on a consistent basis. We might hand over a sort of a data framework or an impact measurement framework to an organization, but it's reliant on consistent sort of ongoing maintenance, and the SEER platform is a really exciting way for us of bringing that to life and making it something that's really easy to engage with and to update and to keep using over time. So I'll end it there, but very happy to have further conversations with anyone who's interested in learning more.
Thanks, James. So it's fascinating. I suppose, Fiona, you could probably recognise your journey in that whole framework as you're going along. And I think it's pretty exciting that you're at a place now where you're really have a lot of the data together, you're able to understand the impacts, you know which data, a lot of the quality issues you've got that you might have had previously has been addressed. And now you're looking into the future for what the next phase looks like. Can you share a bit about, your vision for the next period for Cowboys Community Foundation and the NRL House, and how impact will help inform that?
Gosh, I'm always worried about answering that question because in case anyone on my board is listening, don't scare anyone. Look, I guess with our data journey, it's back to what James was saying, the program logic or the theory of change, that's been a massive part of our journey, is actually putting that into a framework, which was really important for us. Like, we all knew what we were doing and why we were doing it, but we actually didn't have it. We had a strategic plan, but we actually didn't have that articulated well, and we found it really difficult to do initially because there is just so much in everything that you do. So now, everything that we do starts with that. It starts with that program logic or that theory of change. And even if we have NRL Cowboys House, which has its own theory of change, now every part of everything that we do or anything new we introduce into that has its own program logic that sits within the program logic that all sort of feeds up. So that helps us set it up for success from the start. So we do I guess we do our business differently as a result of this journey. So next steps, gosh, I have a big vision for being able to provide supported accommodation for all young people, like Indigenous, First Nation people who come or have to leave home for boarding, that are in other boarding facilities as well, that our graduate campuses can actually support them in that year 13, I guess, for want of a better word, where, if the wheels are going to come off, that's when they're going to come off, and ensuring that we can put everything around them for them to be able to use that education if they've been brave enough to leave home to do it, to go forth and conquer the world, which they will with the right hand holding. They're great.
Absolutely exciting. For anyone who's ever been to Townsville or is from Townsville, we all know how loved the Cowboys is, and the Community Foundation work and the work that you're doing, Fiona, really connects people more deeply to the club and to the sport. Any final sort of last recommendations for others thinking about deepening their connection to community through this kind of work?
I think, we couldn't do what we do without the community partnerships that we have. We are so lucky that along the way we've been able to connect with like-minded organisations, people, foundations, who become our partners in, not in crime, but partners in, in this journey in so many different ways. And there are also other charities and foundations and things out there that support us, and we support them in different ways. Like, I think reducing duplication in this space, it's really just just being really humbly involved in the world around you. Sometimes your sporting brands can be perceived as a bit arrogant because they are so, they are big, and I think that's a real risk, is being perceived as telling people what to do or how to do it or whatever, as opposed to being part of the solution with them. We don't own these young people. They're not our young people. They belong to families and communities that are part of our framework and network. It's about empowerment, not in telling, like listening, engaging, working with all the other wonderful organisations that do incredible things, like not competing in that space. It sort of comes a bit naturally to us now, which is great. And people want to work with you. And also do what you say you're going to do. Like, don't bite off too much. Do what you say you're going to do, and do it well, and do it in partnership with the people that it's going to empower or benefit. And one step in front of the other, it just sort of continues to grow if you get that foundation, that strong foundation right. And everything that you do, if you have the insight from this session, from James especially, like we sort of started on this journey way down the track. I can't even imagine where we would be and what we would have been able to do if we had this at the beginning of our journey. So it's never too late, but I look back and think, God, like we've lost so much cool information that we could have collected and could have done things differently if we had have put these simple frameworks in place. And they are quite simple to put together. Just clearly what you want to do, how you want to do it, with who you're going to do it with, how you're going to measure it, and who you're going to inform with that, and internally, externally. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So on that note, here is a QR code to access the resources. And if you would like to connect with Fiona, meet with James, meet with Adam in my team, that would be terrific. We'd love to share more about supporting you on your journey and where you're at. And Fiona, it's been so awesome to hear your story today. Thank you so much for your time and for the huge commitment you and everyone in the team in the foundation makes to the contribution that you make to people in your community. And finally, so how's the season going?
Oh, it's probably the wrong week to ask because we didn't do so great last weekend. But the weekend before that, we did great. Beating the Broncos is always our highest, our highest achievement. So that was a good week.
That's great. Well, good luck for the rest of the season, and thank you again for your time. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and thank you, James, for your great insights. Look forward to catching up with you again soon.